Professor Kacker served as at All Institute of Medical Sciences for long 33 years, from 63 to 95. I think before some of us were born. And he still remains very active. Professor Kacker started his medical career in King George Medical College, Lucknow, and during his undergraduate career in 60s, he proved his brilliance by winning 21 medals, which included gold, 16 silver, book prizes. I think the college didn't have more medals and more prizes. Otherwise, he would have got that also. And I don't know if these were actually from that college or they borrowed it from some neighboring medical colleges also to give it to him. He earned the best postgraduate student in ENT in 63 in KGMC, Lucknow, and then FRCS from the Royal College of Surgeons, London in 68. He joined the department of ENT at AIIMS in 63 as assistant professor, and then of course gone on to become the director of All India Institute of Medical Sciences. He happened to be the member secretary of the board when I was interviewed and selected to the faculty at AIIMS and joined with his signatures in 92. So I had the privilege of having gone through him during that phase. The compilation of achievements is enormous. He has been a Commonwealth Fellow, Jawaharlal Nehru Fellowship, and then there are several others, including VCI National Award from the Medical Council of India. So the list is so long that it would take me quite a while, and I might end up consuming a large part of the oration time if I continue to do this. But I have to say a few things about you. He was the president of the Indian Association of ENT, and then there are several other associations, including WHO Advisory Panel, and then member of the governing body and the National Institute of Pneumology Association. And amongst the international recognition, he has been international leadership group from 1976. And then there are several other associations which are in fact difficult to read because probably they're in German or maybe in Italian, the honors that he had. He worked on the editorial board. And of course, he was awarded with the prestigious Padma Shri Award in 1986 for his enormous contribution in the field of medicine. Sir, we are honored to have you personally with us today on the day of oration, and it is again my honor and privilege to welcome you all to this oration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I now invite...
I forgot to mention on a personal note, I specifically want to convey my thanks to him for this, what he did for me. And also, I want to convey my thanks to the madam who was looking after the crutch that time. And she was instrumental in bringing my daughter when we used to get late. And she used to take her to her home, to the director's office. And I had the opportunity of having tea many times when to pick her up when sir was not there at home. So convey my gratitude and thanks to her as well, sir.
Thank you, sir. So to take the proceeding further, now I request Professor Alok Thakkar, the head of Otolaryngology, to introduce to the orator.
So thank you, Professor Kaushal Verma, for introducing Professor Kacker, as only you have known him as a student of this institution. Professor Kacker was revered at this institution. Certainly many of us joined this specialty because of the eminence he enjoyed, and many of us, I would say, gained from that eminence when we got our degrees because we were students of Professor Kacker. Professor Mohan Kameshwaran in many ways parallels the achievements of Professor Kacker in his time. I could say that if Professor Kacker was in this time, he would have been Mohan Kameshwaran, and I'm sure it was the other way around, it would have been so. So Professor Kacker was a BC award winner, and of course, so is Professor Kameshwaran. Professor Kacker had a Padam Shri, so does Professor Kameshwaran. Professor Kacker had a immense reputation in otology in the surgeries of those times. We had a series of 8,000 stepidotomies, and we used to marvel as to how it was done. Professor Kameshwaran has 4,000 cochlear implants to his reign. Professor Kacker was delving into vestibular sternoma surgery and pituitary surgery in his times, and today Dr. Kameshwaran, of course, does auditory brainstem implants and has a larger series. Both are preeminent, both are by far the most eminent surgeons of their times in this country and Southeast Asia and far abroad. Professor Kacker was a member of the AIIMS, and you can't have a bigger honor than that. He was a member of the International Federation of Otolaryngological Societies, and he represented us, India, at the AIIMS, and Professor Mohan does it now. So we are very fortunate, Dr. Kameshwaran, that you have made the journey to come to visit us here. It is really a matter of pride for us. Professor Kameshwaran is going to be speaking to us about brainstem implants and cochlear implants. ENT or otolaryngology is the only specialty where we have the ability to replace a sense organ. There is no better exponent of that than Professor Kameshwaran. Sir.
Thank you, Professor Rob, for those very kind words. Being compared to Professor Kacker, I think would be the greatest honor that somebody can have in their lives. Most distinguished director, revered dean, distinguished senior faculty members, members of the Faculty of Otolaryngology, Head and Neck Surgery, distinguished alumni, ladies and gentlemen. It's truly an honor to be here today, and I really mean it. Professor Kacker is what I call the Bhishma Pita of otolaryngology. I once said that to him in a meeting, and he promptly responded saying, "Then you must be Arjuna." So that was one of the greatest moments in my life. He was somebody who was a role model for my generation. I grew up listening his name almost every day in my life because my father and he were very, very close. They were very close, almost like twins. And in fact, even at the age of 98, when my father died, I used to mention his name and his eyes used to fill up. So that's how close they were. A lot has been said about his academic achievements, but I want to just highlight one which was not mentioned. Not many know about it, in fact. And that is, he was the only member from this country ever to have been a member of the Collegium. The Collegium is the highest body of academic otolaryngology in this world. It's our equivalent of a Nobel Prize. In fact, it is so secretive that not even many people know about it. Once you become a member of the Collegium, you are a member for life. And only when you pass away does somebody else replace you. And he's the only member from India. That tells you about him. You don't have to say anything more. So, ladies and gentlemen, give him a big hand. I feel privileged to be giving this oration in his name. I suspect he will approve the topic in a way, knowing him. But it's indeed a privilege to be giving it in front of him. So let's get on with the topic. The introduction of auditory neural prostheses, like cochlear implants, I think has been one of the most significant innovations of the last couple of decades, 20, 30 years. In fact, when Bill Clinton was the president of the United States, he used to have a habit of inviting intellectuals to have breakfast with him. One such meeting was with the American Academy of Medicine, Internal Medicine, physicians. He had a breakfast with them and he threw a question to them saying, what's the most important innovation in your opinion which happened in the last 2 decades? And a lot of, head scratching and discussions and counter discussions. Very rare to get physicians to agree about something. But anyway, they eventually agreed and said it was cochlear implant. And the reason, I think, was because it was the first time that the human effort to integrate an external auditory, electronic circuit with the complex neuronal circuits of the central nervous system. It's the first human effort which is successful. And one of the byproducts of this is that it has also made us to understand the functioning of the human brain better. And this talk is all about that. So as coming to hearing impairment, I mean, I don't have to preach to the choir, but naturally, all of us accept that of all the handicaps, every handicap, of course, is a disaster, but of all of them, the most poignant is the hearing handicap. A, because it's a double handicap. If somebody is born with a hearing handicap, they're also speech and language deprived, deaf and dumb, 2 very terrible words. Secondly, it's a silent handicap. Every other handicap is visible to the other person. So there's an empathy, naturally. You see somebody limping, you feel sorry for him. You see somebody with blind walking around with a stick, your heart goes out. But a person who's hearing challenged looks just like you and me. In fact, they very often have a fixed grin on their face because they can't actually hear what's going on. And when you talk to them and they don't respond, the first reaction is that this person is an arrogant fellow. Sometimes, the more charitable ones will say he is a fool. But nobody is going to say he is hearing handicapped. So it's a silent handicap. So that's the terrible tragedy about it. In the elderly, it leads to cognitive decline. It's now very well established that if somebody is elderly and has got a hearing challenged and is not corrected, it leads into dementia early. And in the very young, in the children, it leads to impairment of speech and language, communications, and decline in IQ. In children, of course, it is a only real handicap which is amenable to correction. And the burden of the problem is significant because in the world over, you have 1 to 2 per 1,000 live births. In India, of course, it's double that. And the good thing about it is it's usually a peripheral problem caused by damage to the end organ, which is the cochlea. And these processes can help to bring them from a world of silence to the world of hearing and sound. The French philosopher Bernard Stiegler said that essentially all humans are prosthetic creatures because we love devices, we love glasses, we love cell phones, we have, you name it, we are glued to them. And similarly also when you've lost a sense or lost an organ, we humans are very, very eager to replace it with a prosthetic device. But coming to the brain it's a very, very complex organ. And the way it functions is best described as an organized chaos. It's an oxymoron, 2 words which mean the opposite. So what does it mean? It is chaos at a neuronal level, but it's organized as a cortical level. So this chaos leads to organization. But the one exception is the auditory system, which is beautifully, impeccably organized at every level. And this, of course, is a gift for the otologists because we are able to take advantage of this organization to intervene at various levels to restore the function of hearing. So auditory neural prostheses represent an opportunity for us. If you look at the auditory system as a cascade, and I like to look at it as a cascade at different levels, each level represents an opportunity for us. So if there's an interruption at any level, we can technically go a level higher and then restore the function there. You can restore hearing. So this is an opportunity that we have simply because of the organization of the auditory system, which we call tonotopicity. That is, every place has a pitch. And this is organized not only in the end organ and the cochlea, but throughout the auditory system, right up to the primary auditory cortex and even secondary auditory cortex. So we have this great big organizations throughout the auditory system. Now, the neural processes actually, if you think about it, is the first, human effort, as I said, to link an external electronic circuit to the CNS, thereby being the prelude to the bionic man. But more than that, it represents a fundamental shift in philosophy in surgery. Because until then, we surgeons were technicians mending damaged organs. And even now we do that. But this is a different philosophy, because rather than mend the organ, we are now thinking about bypassing the organ. And this is a fundamental shift in philosophy for the surgeon, and this is of great significance. So when we started looking at how the brain is functioning, many new or many ideas, even old ideas, started making more sense. So let's first take the concepts of neural plasticity and neural scavenging. Neural plasticity, in simple terms, is you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So you want to train a dog, train him as a puppy. So there is an age limit when you can learn. Now in this room, the people in the front of the hall are all people who are now more or less at the end of the plasticity. But the ones who are right at the back, who are hiding their face, they can change their concepts readily. So the plasticity is an amazing feature of the brain, and it varies from system to system. For example, if you take the vestibular system, plasticity can go on very long. Do a labyrinthectomy or cut the vestibular nerve, the other side can still compensate. But that's not true of the auditory system. The auditory system has a very limited window when you have the ability to learn. And it fades after the age of 4 or 5 or 6. It fades away. Hence, prosthetic intervention in the auditory system has to be done very early. So basically, plasticity is the ability to change, for the neurons to change their function and their networking as a result of intrinsic or extrinsically driven forces. And it is an important factor which can determine the outcomes in hearing impaired individuals when you're intervening with prostheses. So what is scavenging? So when a part of the brain is not used, for example, a child who is born profoundly deaf, the auditory cortex is not used. So brain abhors wastage. So no part of the brain is left silent. So when a part of the brain is not functioning, what happens is the adjacent part slowly creeps over and takes over. You go on a holiday for a short break and you leave your house, you come back after a month or so, your neighbor has slowly moved his fence towards you. That's what happens. Now, if it is a short period, you can come back, fight with him and get your fence back, put back in the right place. But if you've gone for 10 years and you come back, you may find it's no longer there. There may be a mall in your place of your house. So that is exactly what happens in the brain. So when the auditory cortex is not stimulated, the adjacent part of the brain, notably the visual cortex, slowly creeps in and takes over the function of the auditory cortex. If you immediately restore function, there is a fight, and you can actually follow this fight in the brain by following it up with PETs, O2 PET and so on. And you can see that the territory which is lost is slowly captured back by the auditory cortex. But if it's a very long period, then this is no longer possible. the auditory cortex is given up. So this is why even after a long period, even if you stimulate the auditory system, it doesn't make any difference in the hearing or communication for the child. So there is a window of opportunity which we can't miss. This is what we call the sensitive period of plasticity. And this explains the physical basis for neural plasticity. Plasticity itself is not a monolithic thing. There are different types. What I described to you is cross-modal plasticity. That is the auditory system giving up its territory for another system, which is a visual system cortex. So this is known as cross-modal plasticity, and we talked about the sensitive period. So we need to have early implantation, and the rule in the brain is use it or lose it. And if you have visual recruitment, that means, of course, it allows an individual to have slightly enhanced visual function when he is hearing challenge, and vice versa. Both can happen. But there's also an intramodal plasticity, and this is recently, being recognized, and this is very interesting. So what is this? We do cochlear implants. We've been doing for several years. In fact, I've been doing for almost 30 years now. And by implants which we did, and we're still doing, they are really very, very primitive when you compare with the cochlea. The speech processing strategies that we use in the implants is best described as pathetic, no matter what the cochlear implant companies tell you. If you compare with the fine structure coding which happens in the cochlea, this is primitive. Yet, we have tremendous results, all of us. Children I implanted 25 years ago are all amazing now. I have one kid who is now studying in Harvard Law School, speaks 6 languages. He had his implant 20 years ago, and believe me, it is a primitive implant, about 12 generations before. I have a kid in London School of Economics who's doing his PhD. So that's possible. We have doctors who have doing medicine now. We have people in IIT, IIM. So the sky is the limit. But each and every one of them, the cochlear implant is a primitive source of auditory stimulation. So we always talk about the implant and the auditory brain as a marriage. If it's a marriage, ladies and gentlemen, it's an extremely unequal marriage. The brain is by far the dominant partner, and it's so hungry because it's deprived of stimulation that whatever primitive stimulus we give, it grabs it, digests it, and makes sense out of it. And that's why we get success in all this. So it is the brain which is doing the hard work, not the implant. So this is intramodal plasticity. So even if you give primitive stimuli in the place of a very advanced stimulus, you can still get the auditory system to be functioning. So when you're looking at hearing loss and we're looking at investigations, we've had a whole plethora of investigations. I won't go into it, but I've highlighted 2 of them. The P300 and the cortical rotation. These are very important because they, to some extent, tell us how the brain works. So P300 is a very old thing. It's described as early as 65. It is the first objective test of the limbic system. We'll come to that. It's an event-related potential and depends on attention. So basically, it's a stimulus for which you are paying attention. In the background of a running stimulus, one particular stimulus is being drawn to your attention. And this may be a visual, auditory, somatosensory, but auditory is the most prominent of them. It is from multiple subcortical sites. Many of them are from the limbic system and thalamus. It is a neural correlate of sequential processing. So it's not just one, but multiple processing, short-term memory and decision making. Attention is very, very important for it. Audit discrimination, memory, and semantic expectancy all are involved in generation of this P300. P300 is only recorded if the subject is paying attention. So if you have somebody who is inattentive, you will not record P300 from the same signal. So it is not depending on the signal, it is depending on the person's attention of the signal. If somebody has decreased cognitive ability, the P300 also becomes decreased. So indirectly, you can also assess their cognitive function. So it's been linked to disorders where attention is affected, like the Down syndrome, auditory processing disorders, psychiatric disorders, and so on. And it's even been proposed as a communication aid for individuals who have locked-in syndrome. So this is an amazing test because it's the first time that we have an ability to not just look at the response of the brain, but look at the response of the brain to the attention of the person. So you're not looking at a brain function, you're looking at the mind of the person. A test for the mind, not for the brain. So this is the significance of this particular test. Now coming back to implants, now we are able to do these auditory implants only because of the phenomenon of tonotopicity, and I told you about it. Basically, if you look at the cochlea, it is a huge, giant piano. In a piano, you have keys. On the left side, you have the basal notes. On the right side, you have the high frequency notes. The cochlea is an upside down piano. It's an ulta piano, where in the base you have the high frequency and in the apex you have the low frequency. If you play this piano by electrical stimulation fast, you produce sound. If you stimulate it super fast, you produce speech. So this is how this tonotopicity is made advantage of. Interestingly, the same tonotopicity exists all through the auditory system, albeit in slightly different forms. So the next level, of course, is the brainstem. And in the brainstem, you have the cochlear nucleus, dorsal and ventral. And there also you have this tonotopicity. But it's different because in the cochlea, it is two-dimensional, like a piano. In the brainstem, it is three-dimensional because it's like a layers of an onion with isofrequency. So it's not just on the top, but top as well as into the depths. So if you're going to play the piano in the brainstem, you have to play it not only superficially, but also up and down, so that it's a very different concept. And this goes on all over the auditory system. So this gives us an opportunity to place implants in different parts of the brain. So we've already done it in the cochlea, we are doing it in the brainstem, and now we are thinking about, we are not thinking, we are already doing it, although in a very limited fashion, in the midbrain inferior colliculus. Of course, the cochlear implants are the most successful auditory process. There's no doubt about it. We already know that every one of us has got experience with it. And we know that kids do absolutely well. And even adults who have lost hearing can get back their hearing and get back functionality and normal life. This picture which you see on the right lower corner is my favorite picture. It's two implanted kids, one whispering and the other hearing. It tells you that this one who's whispering has got good speech and the one who's hearing has got excellent hearing. So this one picture is worth 1,000 words. If somebody has doubts about cochlear implant, just this one picture should do. So candidacy, of course, today the ideal age in a congenitally deaf child for intervention is below the age of 1. For the first time, FDA has reduced the approval age for 1 year to 9 months now. When we started, it was 2 years. It is now 9 months. So we know that the earlier you intervene, the better it is. The results are far, far better because the pruning of the neurons in the central nervous system goes on till the age of 1. And if you are stimulating well, then you are augmenting the necessary circuits and removing the unwanted neurons. So thereby strengthening the circuits which are going to be used. Of course, today we have a whole lot of expanded indications, and that is only a reflection of the success of the cochlear implant. So we are doing more and more cases which are challenging, which are difficult. I won't go into that, but suffice to say that the children who are the adults or children who we never thought of implanting when we started, maybe in the 90s, but today a lot of them would qualify for implants, and this is simply because of our experience with the implants. The only prerequisite you need for a cochlear implant is that there should be a cochlea and a nerve. These are only two things, and a cochlea should be connected to the brainstem. The brain, of course, has the ability to get information from this very sparse input and make sense out of it. So basically, this is a job of the auditory brain more than the implant. Now, cortical potentials are yet another fascinating modality for looking at the brain. Now, when you give a sound, you have a response in the brainstem and so on. And these cortical potentials are not present at birth, even if you have normal hearing. But as you get older, by 3 months, you start recording cortical potentials. At 6 months, they are better formed. At 1 year, they are very well formed. At the age of 18 or 20, it is fully mature. In other words, cortical evoked potentials are not just a response to hearing, but they are an indicator or a biomarker of auditory cortical maturation. What does it mean? It means that you not only heard, you got a memory of it, you have processed it. So if I do a cochlear implantee, switch him on, he will have no cortical potentials. But months later, I can start getting cortical potentials in him. And from the morphology of the cortical potentials, I can say that this kid is going to do very well. He's going to be a star performer. Not only that, if you bring an implantee to me and I do a cortical potential, I can not only tell you he's hearing with the implant, but I can also tell you that this man has been hearing for some time, or this child has been hearing for some time. So it's a ability to look at as a biomarker of auditory maturation, cortical maturation. So this is a very important tool for us now in monitoring the progress of implantees. The positive wave P1 comes from the auditory cortex, and the N1 comes from thalamocortical connections as well as corticocortical coupling. So it's both of them are very specific waves that gives you an idea about the connections in the brain. In very early children, in the implanted children, you get very good responses with P1, and they form very well formed in normal latency. But if you do it later, in older children, you will find that this is not the case. So you can definitely say this kid is going to be a good performer or not. So some examples of that. Now, if you have poor speech and language outcomes, and an N1 is not very good, then this tells you that the thalamocortical and the corticocortical connections are faulty. Whereas, interestingly, if you have an adult who has lost hearing and you're given back hearing, if you do his visual evoked potentials, so not cortical, you do his visual evoked potentials, you'll still get a very good P2, thereby telling you that the visual component is also contributing to his hearing. So what are the clinical applications? So there's not necessarily a trade-off between visual and auditory processing. They're not necessarily opposing. Increased cross-modal connections for visual processing may facilitate in lip reading for the cochlear implantee. So a cochlear implantee may get cues, non-auditory cues as well as visual cues, and this greatly enhances his communication. After all, when I talk to you, if two of us are talking to each other, we are automatically looking at visual cues, whether we like it or not only listening. We are looking at the lip and we are looking at the visual cues. So basically this is enhanced in an implantee. And it will help them to understand speech and noise. There are also other modalities for studying the brain function, PET-CT for example, and NIRS. And they help us to assess the outcomes in cochlear implantees as well. The FDG PET is used, of course, it has a good correlation with the pre-implant hypometabolism in the auditory cortex. And also, higher metabolic rates in FDG PET in late implanted children suggests that there are a lot of cross-modal activity going on. There are also good speech and language outcome children. You will see the PET-CT will show you that there are very good connections in the prefrontal cortex, in the dorsal networks. Whereas the ones with the poor outcomes are the ones which have connections in the ventral network. So the significance of this we are yet to make out, but we know that there are different patterns of connections between good performers and bad performers. So this is a good example of the poor implantees on the right side, and left side you see the highlight, the auditory cortex brightening up after the PET-CT. Functional near-infrared spectroscopy is yet another modality which is now being increasingly used as a non-invasive and an objective neuroimaging tool. It's based on the oxyhemoglobin, deoxyhemoglobin in the cortical band response to stimulus. So when you give a sound stimulus, you can actually record the circulation of the auditory cortex and see the oxyhemoglobin versus deoxyhemoglobin. And this helps you, of course, to study the metabolic activity in response to sound. So what are the future applications of cross-modal and intramodal? We have been talking about this plasticity for some time now. Well, the sensory substitution becomes a possibility. So when it's not possible to get back a particular sense, you may use another sense to substitute. So in blind people, using acoustic sonification as a visual information stream. This is possible now. Similarly, eyeglasses which convert speech into subtitles for persons who are hearing loss, who cannot receive an implant. So these are all aids which tells you that sensory substitution may actually become a helpful thing. In the future, we may have markers of intramodal, cross-modal plasticity. And this may become very valuable assets for early identification intervention. And brain plasticity will provide the framework upon which habilitation and therapy will be designed and will be individualized. So we'll have multimodal approaches to habilitation following implantation, and this may be beneficial. Now, what happens if you have no cochlea or you have no cochlear nerve? You can't put a cochlear implant, because then we go to the higher station, and this is where auditory brainstem implants come in. It's one of the greatest triumphs, I think, in biomedical and surgical collaboration, and in the management of deafness of adults who have had NF2, where they've lost hearing in both ears, and children who have had no cochlea or cochlear nerve at birth. Research is still ongoing. It's still a developing technology. The electrode is kept in the brain, in the brain stem, in the cochlear nucleus, in the lateral recess of the fourth ventricle, foramen of Luschka. That's where the cochlear nucleus is situated, fortunately on the surface. And this nucleus has a dorsal and a ventral component which straddles the inferior cerebellar peduncle, and both have to be accessed if you want to get the full benefit. So indications: children who are born without a cochlea or cochlear nerve, adults who had NF2 and who have had surgery or lost hearing in both ears, bilateral temporal bone fractures which have denervated the cochlea, or bilaterally totally ossified cochlea where you cannot put a cochlear implant. Just an intraoperative image of the implant. Now, interestingly, you can also get cortically evoked potentials in ABI patients. This is one of the very significant findings that our group worked out on, which tells us that not only do these children hear, but they also develop auditory maturation. So this is a very definite evidence that the ABI is helping them. So can we have sound now, please, if it's possible? So can they hear?
Hi. How are you? Okay. What is your name? Hi. Mansaptayo. Oh, January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August.
Remember, these are children without a cochlea or a cochlear nerve. So this is not a medical miracle, nothing is in my dictionary. And the important thing is, if you look at the rhythm of his speech, January, February, March, that tells you that he is having an auditory feedback. His speech is not bland. It has got inflections. That tells you that he is monitoring his own speech. And that's the most important evidence that you have that this child is listening to his own speech. And this is important, very, very important for us. So next is the auditory midbrain implant. So we have now got about 7 or 8 kids in the world who have received implants in the midbrain because the brainstem is not developed, the inferior colliculus. Most of them were done by Professor Coletti in Verona and 1 or 2 in Hanover as well. It's easy compared to a brainstem implant. Surgery is easy because the midbrain is much more accessible for us surgically. But as we get higher and higher to the central system and more away from the peripheral organ, you gain some, you lose some. The gain is that it's easier surgically for the surgeon. But you lose functions. What do you lose? When you go to the brainstem and you stimulate, the child can still hear and he can say, yeah, my father's calling, my mother's calling. You go to the midbrain and you stimulate, the person can hear. When you hear your mother or you hear your child or you hear your, in my case, my grandchild, it fills my heart with joy. I have happiness in me. Now, this is due to the connections with the hippocampus. This is lost when you go to the midbrain. So when you go to the midbrain, my grandchild calls me, I can hear him, I can respond to him, but there's no emotion to it. So this is a new thing for us. We know that the association between the systems has certain specific pathways and we lose out as we go higher up. So there is because the next temptation is to say, well, why not we put it in the auditory cortex? It's right there. It's so much easier than going and poking in the brainstem. But then you would have lost a lot more. So there is something that you gain, there's something that you lose. So ladies and gentlemen, I come to my conclusion, which is that today we have wonderful imaging techniques and audiological tools which have enhanced the understanding of the auditory neural system. Advances in biomedical engineering and neural processes have helped in rehabilitation of people with hearing loss. As a follow-up of research in cognitive neurosciences and auditory neural processes, interesting insights into the functioning of not only the auditory system but the entire brain have been garnered. These insights have given us a new dimension of the way we look at the functioning of the brain. From auditory processes of experience, we have learned that with sensory systems, the most powerful neural network of the brain is trained over many, many years, hundreds and thousands of years, and millions of repetitions to recognize a complex pattern of sound and speech. In deaf children, congenitally deaf children with cochlear implants and brainstem implants, even the distorted patterns given by the processes are made highly intelligible and sufficient for a previously untrained brain to learn speech and language. Research in auditory processes have shown how the ear and brain function together for pattern recognition, and these insights help design better processes. Auditory deprivation leads to reorganization, which has considerable impact on clinical outcomes. Early intervention with neural processes can reverse the changes in the brain, provide good hearing and speech and language outcomes. Mapping neurocognitive characteristics of the brain changes the underlying speech and language acquisition after cochlear implant and help plan appropriate habilitation and improve outcomes. Thank you all for your patience.
Thank you, sir, for the excellent oration. May I now request the Director AIIMS and Dean Academic AIIMS to present a memento and certificate to the orator, Professor Mohan Kameshwaran, please. I now request Professor Rajiv Kumar, the Associate Dean Academics, to propose the vote of thanks.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Professor Kacker, Professor Srinivas, Professor Kameshwaran, Professor Verma, Professor Tucker, faculty, students, people who come here to attend the update. It's uncommon to see hear an oration on something that is so specific and so advanced, yet be presented so lucidly that you're able to understand everything that's being said. Neuroanatomy, neurophysiology as an undergraduate used to be the one place you wouldn't want to go because there was nothing you would understand and you would come away just hoping you wouldn't be asked a question. But the clarity and the beauty with which it's been presented today makes it clear that there are things that are still clearly being researched, and the advances that have been made in this field are so massive. And as Professor Kameshwaran said, it's probably one of the first sensory systems that have been replaced. A prosthesis has been developed for a sensory system, and we're probably just making the beginning. And therefore, thank you very much for taking the time out and presenting us with your research, your work, which obviously is tremendous. And also to the Department of Otolaryngology for setting up an oration. This is only the second oration, for recognizing one of the stalwarts of this institution. This institution has been built on the work of people like Dr. Kacker, who have devoted a lifetime to developing an institution which can be an institution of repute. So thank you very much for setting up the oration in the very first place. To the Director, the Dean and members of the academic section who are now nurturing this oration and ensuring that it gets the privilege of place that it has. And of course to all of you for being here, both for the update and for the oration, and making this entire exercise worthwhile. Thank you very much, everyone.
Now please join us for tea outside.